Dr. Ganguly. And now you can go with the introduction part. Come on, carry on.
Okay. Hello and welcome to third online certificate course on Indian foreign policy under Foreign Policy School and FPRC initiative. I am Hafsa Akram from Bahawalpur, Pakistan and intern at FPRC New Delhi. I have done MSc International Relations from Namal University, Islamabad. I would like to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Rajat Ganguly. He is based at Murdoch University, Perth, Australia, and is a political scientist by training and completed his doctoral studies at Tulane University, United States. He specialized in international relations, security studies, and defense and strategic affairs. He has written about identity politics, ethnic conflict, political violence, and armed insurgency in South and Southeast Asia, Indian security and military modernization, and Asian politics and international affairs. His publications are available on ResearchGate and academia. He is the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Asian Security and International Affairs, published by SPEC Publications. He is also on the editorial board of the Journal of the South Asian Development and South Asian Survey. He grew up in Calcutta, India, an alumni of S.P. James School and Jeddah University, where he completed a Bachelor in Arts with honor in political science and a Master in Arts in International Relations. He has traveled extensively around the world and has lived and worked in India, United States, UK, New Zealand, and Australia. He is happy to talk to people, particularly juniors, academics, and research scholars about research, writing, and publishing. If you have any questions regarding the Journal of Asian Security and International Affairs, do not hesitate to contact him. And now I would like to hand over to Professor Mahendra Gaur, Director, FPRC, New Delhi, to continue the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Afsha. And now you can mute your video. And Dr. Ganguly, Afsha, mute your video. Yeah. Dr. Ganguly, can I speak to you? Can I see you on the screen?
Yep. I'm here.
Yeah, Dr. Ganguly, that was a brief introduction. I think it will take much more time to say many things about you, but we kept it very brief. And before we begin the proceedings, I would like to thank you once again on behalf of FPRC for having accepted our invite to address these students. In fact, this is an initiative for Indian university students who are interested in understanding Indian foreign policy, because they are the best bet so far as the educated class of present generation is concerned. Because we see so much of rubbish on the social media, because people don't understand. People don't understand. And these are the students who first let them understand the various processes and implications of how the decisions are taken. It is very easy to say attack Pakistan, attack China, and all that. But these are popular things. But let us also think about the problem that a government faces while deciding or while taking decisions. They are very difficult decisions. Sometimes the government has to bow to the public opinion, the writings of the social media, and decisions are taken on Twitter. That is a part of Indian diplomacy. Our Prime Minister doesn't hold conferences, but he runs India's foreign policy on Twitter. So that is there. So that's why I thought of this initiative. That first the university students who are interested in international relations, particularly Indian foreign policy and diplomacy, let them first understand the issue. And I think policymakers the diplomats, the academics, and media persons are the most suitable persons who can do this job. So that's why I invite all four categories of guests and all that, and I trouble them from time to time. And I'm really thankful to you for having spare time. I know you are a busy person, 24/7, writing articles, traveling, having besides your own university, affairs and all that. So thank you very much. And now I think I will make you the host so that you can use your PPT. Okay.
Okay. I am actually not showing any PPT because I thought it's
No,
half an hour.
If you don't have any PPT, it's all right. If you have PPT,
Okay.
I can make you the host. I think let me make you the host. Let me make you the host. You do whatever you like.
All right.
I will make you the host.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Gore. Let me, at the very outset, thank you very much for inviting me to this event today and giving me the opportunity not only to speak to the students who are here at this session, but hopefully through you, this discussion will reach a wider audience. And as you very correctly said, what we need is some very calm, sober analysis of what is going on, so that we can actually properly understand what governments are facing and how they are dealing with it. Unfortunately, social media or even some television stations, some of the discussion that's going on over there, it's not very helpful from the point of actually understanding what's going on, and secondly, from the point of even suggesting a course of policy to deal with some of these issues. Now, the brief that you have given me tonight to talk about Pakistan and Afghanistan, this is something I usually cover in one semester of lecturing. So it's a huge area, massive topic. There's lots of history and tremendously complicated problem. By no means easy to not only to understand, but easy to figure out the intricacies of politics and culture and history and civilization and ideology. I mean, all these things which are intermixed in this very, very dynamic kind of relationship. So what I thought I would do is, given the paucity of time, because I have about half an hour, 40 minutes, that I will actually talk about the current state of relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan, especially since the taking over of Afghanistan by the Taliban in August of 2021. So this is technically Taliban 2.0. As most of you would know, that there was the Taliban 1.0, which came to power in 1996 and was in power in Afghanistan until 2001. And in 2001, the American invasion basically removed the Taliban regime from power. And the 20-year American occupation and the experimentation with Afghan nation building, etc., happened. Not very successfully, because eventually it all came crashing down in August of 2021 with America pulling out and the Taliban coming back. So all of you know that history. What the starting point of my discussion would be that when the Taliban came back to power in Afghanistan in August of 2021, there was wild celebration in Pakistan. And some leaders were quoted as saying that, we have once again destroyed another superpower. So the implication was that we had destroyed the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had occupied Afghanistan from 1979 until 1989. And, those of you who know the history, that Pakistan became the staging ground of an Afghan resistance movement against Soviet rule. And eventually this led to the withdrawal of Soviet forces from Afghanistan in 1989. And many people imagine this as a massive victory of not only Pakistan, but the United States and the Western countries. So this time, when the Taliban came back, there was wild celebration in Pakistan, and many people started talking about this destruction of a superpower. We had done it once before with the Soviet Union. We have done it again with the United States. And the euphoria was that a group called the Taliban, which the Pakistanis basically helped create in 1994, because most of the Taliban cadres and most of their top leadership were basically, they came from refugee families, Afghan refugee families who had settled in Pakistan, especially in the tribal areas. And these people were instrumental in creating the Taliban in 1994. And obviously, it's very well known that the Pakistani military and the ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence, the Pakistani covert, the spy agency, the covert agency, they helped the Taliban to come to power in 1996, when the Taliban was able to defeat what was then called the Northern Alliance government, a government that was basically a government with a coalition between Tajiks and Uzbeks against the predominant Pashtuns of Afghanistan. So when the Taliban, which is predominantly a Pashtun movement, conquered power in Afghanistan in 1996, it did so with massive military support from Pakistan. And most of the Taliban cadres came from Pakistan. Some of the groups that were associated with them, such as the Haqqani Network, etc., they were all based in Pakistan. So Pakistan played a massive role in the victory of the Taliban in 96. So the feeling was that this is our proxy. This is one of the actors that we had helped create. We had nurtured them. We had protected them during the 20-year of American occupation, the war that took place in Afghanistan. And our protege has just won. The Taliban has just won. America has gone back home now. They are defeated. And this is a triumph in a sense for Pakistan, for Pakistan's foreign policy in Afghanistan. Now, in the initial months after the second time Taliban take over, there were several things that kind of pointed to this big role that Pakistan was hoping it is going to play in Afghanistan once again. So the first thing that happened was that the remnant of the Afghan government, I mean, most of the American imposed Afghan government, most of the people had run away. As you know, President Ghani had fled away. But there was one guy, one of the vice presidents who was also the spy chief of Afghanistan, this guy called Amarullah Saleh, who is actually a Tajik by his ethnic origin, and a very big fan of former Tajik leader Amir Shah Massoud. Amarullah Saleh and a few others, including Amir Shah Massoud's son, they created a resistance movement against this Taliban takeover by once again moving into this area called the Panjshir Valley. So the Taliban, after it took over control in Afghanistan, one of the first things it had to do is subdue this resistance. And there were reports that Pakistani soldiers had joined them, cadres or students from Pakistani madrasas. Somebody said 5,000, someone said 10,000. A massive number of these cadres went into Afghanistan from Pakistan to help the Taliban. And this was all done with the intention of suppressing this northern resistance force or Afghan National Resistance Force, as they were calling them, in the Panjshir Valley, which is about 60 kilometers north of Kabul. And there were footage coming out of that war, which showed that helicopter gunships were being used by the Taliban to attack these rebels on the ground from the air. And the question that emerged immediately was, how is it possible that the Taliban knew how to fly these military helicopters? Well, they didn't. Most of the pilots who went and flew these fighter helicopters were actually Pakistani Air Force pilots. So Pakistan was very strongly involved in the initial few months after the Taliban takeover in trying to consolidate Taliban rule against this pocket of resistance called this national resistance. There were also reports that the Director General of the ISI was in Kabul because he was part of the discussion regarding the formation of this Taliban interim government. So who's going to get what ministry? How is the government going to be structured? What kind of message is the government going to send out, etc., etc. And you could see a very strong Pakistani presence in the room while these discussions were happening, at least in the initial few months after the Taliban takeover. And the third thing that happened, of course, and Imran Khan was still prime minister at that time, he had not been removed yet. Imran Khan went on the diplomatic offensive and started talking about, why the Western powers should release much needed aid to the Taliban government in Afghanistan. And he also started talking about how Afghanistan's foreign accounts had been frozen in American banks, etc. That this money need to be unfrozen. The money needs to now come to Afghanistan so that the Taliban can utilize the money and start governing properly. So there was a bit of friction between Pakistan and the Western countries on this point, because the West wanted to be reassured that the Taliban 2.0 would actually be a much more humane version of Taliban 1.0, that they are going to actually honor commitments, they're going to honor human rights, they will allow women to be educated, etc., etc. In other words, they'll be much more moderate compared to what we were used to between 1996 and 2001. So Imran Khan started talking almost on behalf of the Taliban to an international audience, saying, we need to give these guys a chance, release the money, give them the support that they need in order to, now properly govern and hopefully bring the country a much needed stability. Now, this euphoria, that this feeling that Pakistan has won, its proxy has won, and they were now back in control in Afghanistan, America has fled, etc. This feeling actually also was very strongly rubbing off on India, where there was a lot of discussion among security experts and military people and government people that the coming to power of the Taliban in Afghanistan is bad news for India. And I remember General Naravane, the former head of the Indian Army, talking extensively about how he feared that the insurgency grid in Jammu and Kashmir is once again going to be reactivated in a major way now that the Taliban has come to power. One aspect of this coming to power, which probably didn't get a lot of coverage in the Indian media, and possibly also not in the Pakistani media, but for different reasons, this aspect was that America had left behind billions of dollars of military hardware in Afghanistan, because the American withdrawal was very messy. It was, ill thought out. They hadn't actually planned the withdrawal out in a very proper sense. So by the time when they left, they were not in a position to take back with them these very sophisticated military hardware, which they had to dump in Afghanistan. And nobody talked about this in the US media as well, except for one person, and that was a reporter called Lara Logan, who basically argued in her television presentations, in her talk, that most of this military hardware were being actually put on flatbed trucks in Afghanistan and taken across the land border into Pakistan, and they were disappearing into Pakistan. So the Pakistani military were probably getting their hands on this military hardware, some of these, weapons and ammunition and protective clothing and gear and radar and so on. And General Naravane actually talked about this in his presentation when he talked about why he feared that the insurgency grid is going to be reactivated in J&K, and that some of these weapons from Afghanistan that the Americans had left behind would eventually find their way into J&K. It hasn't happened in a very big way yet, but obviously the story is still very fresh, and we have yet to see what will happen in the future. So all of this in the first 2-3 months of the Taliban taking over. But by the time the new year came, beginning of this year, and this is where my presentation is going to go now. From the beginning of this year, there has been some serious problems that has emerged between the Taliban government in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Pakistani state. So real serious problems have emerged. And I want to focus on several aspects of this problem in order to make the point that not everything is very hunky-dory anymore. That these two actors, the Pakistani state, obviously the Pakistani state is controlled by the Pakistani military and its intelligence operation through the ISI. So this Pakistani state and Taliban as an actor, who were once basically joined at the hip, they were helping each other. Now, all of a sudden, now that the Taliban is back in power and that initial euphoria is over, the honeymoon period is over, serious questions have now emerged between these actors. Now, I don't mean to suggest that this means that they are at loggerheads or they are at war, no, but the picture is not as friendly as it once was. So if you look back a few months ago, the picture was quite friendly, at least until the end of 2021. 2022, dark clouds are gathering in that relationship, and that's where I think I'm going to focus. So several reasons for this dark cloud, why these problems have emerged. The first problem, and a very big problem, is with the Pakistani chapter of the Taliban. So the Taliban initially is the Afghan Taliban, formed in 1994, based in Afghanistan, etc. You all know that. But during the time when the Taliban basically moved to Pakistan after 2001, and Mullah Omar and some of his immediate fellow leaders, they were basically running a government in exile from Pakistan. And there were 3 government in exile councils based in Pakistan. One is the Peshawar Shura, one was the Miriam Shah Shura, and the most important, obviously, was the Quetta Shura, which was run by Mullah Omar. So while these guys were in Pakistan, what emerged in Pakistan was a Pakistani version of the Taliban, which is called the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, or simply put, the Pakistani Taliban. Now, ideologically, these guys are very similar. They are basically the same. And if you actually analyze these groups in Pakistan, whether it's the Afghan Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, the Haqqani Network, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Lashkar-e-Jangvi, and a whole host of other groups. I mean, these groups are all basically Salafi jihadi groups. They're basically anchored by extreme Deobandi Wahhabi ideology. They all are ideologically, therefore, very similar. They all are joined at the hip. They help each other. They share their cadres with each other. They have separate identities for sure, but having a separate identity doesn't mean that they completely do different things. They often actually act in tandem with each other. Now, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan has grown tremendously in power, especially in the federally administered tribal area, which is called the Fatah, which for all intents and purposes enjoys significant amounts of autonomy. And this autonomy they enjoyed not only during British time, also under Pakistan. So in the Fatah and in parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the presence of the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan has grown enormously. And it has grown to the point when the TTP is now demanding imposition of Sharia law, Sharia rule Islamic State in the areas that they control. And this has brought the TTP into some conflict with the Pakistani military. Now, with the Taliban back to power in Afghanistan from August of 2021, what has happened is that the TTP, coming under pressure from the Pakistani military, they have basically crossed the Afghan-Pakistan border, which is known as the Durand Line. They have crossed the border and they have established their training centers, their safe sanctuaries in southern Afghanistan, centered around Kandahar province, centered around Helmand province. And this is where they are basically holed up. And they are launching their military operations against Pakistan out of these sanctuaries or bases which are in southern Afghanistan across the border. And the Pakistani government, the Pakistani military, is now asking the Taliban government that you need to act against these people who are now harming Pakistani interests. And it is this which has brought the Pakistani government into confrontation with the Taliban, because the Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, is basically refusing to do anything against the Pakistani Taliban, because at the end of the day, these are blood brothers. You know, the Pakistani Taliban is Pashtun, the Afghan Taliban is predominantly Pashtun. They are ideologically very similar. They are almost like twin brothers. So from the Afghan Taliban point of view, taking serious action against the Pakistani Taliban is something that they think they cannot do. And as a result of this, there is now growing line of friction between Pakistan and Afghanistan over the sanctuaries and military camps that the TTP has created now in Afghanistan. So this is one kind of thing that is we got to keep looking at as we go forward. The second thing that has brought a lot of friction between the Taliban and Pakistan is the growing presence of Islamic State in Afghanistan. And this Islamic State in Afghanistan is known as you know, as the Islamic State Corazon province. This is part of the Caliphate ideology that Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of northern India combined is the Corazon province of an Islamic Caliphate. And this Islamic Caliphate stretches from northern Africa all the way to southern Philippines. So this massive landmass that the forces of Islam wants to conquer and wants to consolidate. And ISKP is a small part of that bigger caliphate idea. Now, if you ask experts about ISKP in Pakistan, there are several theories about ISKP. Now, one theory, which is something that the Western security experts very strongly believe, is that the ISKP was the creation of the Pakistani ISI simply to divert blame from the Taliban for suicide attacks against the US-backed Afghan government. So before August of 2021, when the US-backed government was still in power, and the Taliban was negotiating with the Americans in Doha, in Qatar, they were still attacking strategic targets inside Afghanistan. And the Western theorists believe that the ISKP is a bogey that was created by the Pakistani ISI in order to assign blame for these attacks on the ISKP so that the Taliban would not be accused of continuing the war while simultaneously negotiating with the Americans and with the Afghan government. So this is one theory, that the ISKP actually doesn't exist. It was something like a bogey, like a cover that was created by the Pakistani ISI. The second theory, of course, is that with the collapse of the caliphate in Syria and Iraq around 2018, 2019, a lot of these fighters from Afghanistan who were fighting in that caliphate war in Syria, they left that theater, they escaped, they figured out a way to come out of there without getting arrested, and they returned back to Afghanistan. And it is these elements who are gradually consolidating their power base, their followers in Afghanistan. And one of the things that a lot of people are talking about as a point of separation between the Afghan Taliban and the ISKP is that the Afghan Taliban is not so much interested in exporting the Islamic revolution beyond the borders of Afghanistan. This is something that I'm hearing also from a lot of people who follow Central Asia, that the Islamist movement in Central Asia is getting zero traction with the Afghan Taliban, because the Afghan Taliban basically doesn't want to talk about anything other than Afghanistan. So they are Afghan nationalists at the end of the day. And their discussion is centered on Afghanistan, whereas the ISKP people are upset that this Islamist takeover of Afghanistan, which is a victory, according to them, of the forces of Islam, that this then needs to be exported into neighboring countries such as Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan or Tajikistan in Central Asia, into Pakistan proper through the empowerment of the TTP and an Islamist, a proper Islamist takeover of the Pakistani state, etc. And then more importantly, that this needs to be then exported into the Indian subcontinent, which fits in within the concept of the Ghazwa-e-Hind, that is the battle for Hindustan, that many hardline Islamists believe that forces of Islam have to wage in order to reassert Islamist rule in the Indian subcontinent. And there are groups in Bangladesh, for example, who have bought into this, and they speak the similar kind of language, that this is really a fight between forces of Islam and believers and non-believers and so on. And a third theory about ISKP, which is now beginning to get traction, is that there probably are lower level Taliban leaders or leaders of factions who are probably unhappy with the kind of governing experience that they are experiencing in Afghanistan under the Taliban for the last 10-11 months, that these people are disgruntled with the Taliban leadership and they want something much more radical. They want a more stronger Islamist kind of state, and they are therefore leaving the Taliban and moving under the banner or going under the banner of the ISKP. So depending on who you ask, Western scholars would say the ISKP actually doesn't exist on the ground very strongly. It is more a creation of the ISI in order to deflect the blame from the Taliban. And then you have Afghan analysts, subcontinent-based Indian analysts, and others who are saying, no, actually ISKP does exist. They are actually carrying out massive attacks against non-Pashtun population in Afghanistan. Their aim is to create some kind of an ethnic civil war in Afghanistan. And all of this is being done with the intention that this Islamist takeover of Afghanistan then needs to be spread widely, not only in the West, in Central Asia, but also in the East, in Pakistan, and then into India. And this probably is a serious reason why the Taliban is at loggerheads with Pakistan, because the Taliban probably believes that, or at least a part of the Afghan Taliban probably believes that there are elements in Pakistan, especially elements within the ISI or within the military, who are actually encouraging the ISKP and who are trying to use the ISKP or trying to build up the ISKP as a form of leverage against the Taliban. So they are trying to put pressure on the Taliban by strengthening the ISKP. And this is increasingly looking like it's a point of friction between the Taliban government and Pakistan. The third thing that has emerged in the last few months is a serious problem of the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. And those of you who have studied history would know that this border, which is known as the Durand Line, was drawn by the British. And this border was created as a result of the Anglo-Afghan wars that took place in the 19th and 20th centuries, as a result of which Afghanistan lost a lot of territory. And more specifically, 3 pieces of land, which are now in Pakistan, are territory that the Afghan government believes belongs to Afghanistan. One is this federally administered tribal area, or FATA, or simply put, called tribal areas. So this is something that the Afghan government believes is actually Afghan land, which was taken forcibly by the British. Second, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province in Pakistan, before that, this province was known as the Northwest Frontier Province. This is basically, predominantly Pashtun land. People in that province are predominantly Pashtun. And in Afghanistan, there is a very strong feeling that these are Pashtun lands, which once belonged to Afghanistan, but were taken from Afghanistan by the British through these wars and conquest and so on. And effectively, when the British left India in 1947, these lands, these stolen Afghan lands were given to Pakistan. And the third area in this discussion is northern Balochistan, centered on the capital of Quetta. So northern Balochistan, the tribal areas, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, clearly the Afghan government believes is Afghan land, which illegally occupied by Pakistan. And as a result of this, the Durand line, which is officially the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, is very important to remember that the Durand line has never been accepted as the official border by any Afghan government. It was not accepted under the Afghan monarchy when Zahid Shah was the monarch. It was not accepted under President Daud, who overthrew Zahid Shah. It was not accepted under the communist experiment, when the communists were in power. And even the Taliban did not accept the Durand line as the legitimate boundary between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, all of a sudden, the Durand line has become a real serious problem because this border, for the most part in Pakistan's history, they had left this border as a very soft border. So these Pashtun people on the Pakistani side and on the Afghanistan side, they could come and go as they please. The border controls were very lax. People on both sides, often have very strong family ties, kinship ties. So they move back and forth. There's a lot of trade that takes place across the border, legitimate trade as well as illegitimate trade in the form of drugs and guns and whatnot, human trafficking and some of these other problems. But for the most part, the Pakistani state had looked the other way when it came to the border on one condition, that nobody rakes up the border issue. And some scholars have argued that the reason why Pakistan actually, used the Islam card, the religion card, to create this Islamist mindset within the Pashtun Mujahideen and later within the Pashtun-dominated Taliban, is because the ISI and the military figured that if we keep talking about religion, that perhaps we can overcome we can replace this very strong nationalist sentiment that exists within the Pashtuns by removing that and putting this pan-religious idea in their head, in their mind. So one reason why this religious indoctrination, this religious idea that was pushed into the Pashtuns was basically to diffuse, to lower the pitch of Pashtun nationalism, which was talking about reunifying all these Pashtun lands under one political authority in Afghanistan. So basically saying, we don't recognize the Durand line as the legitimate border. Now, all of a sudden, the Durand line has become important because the TTP, which is now across in Afghanistan, crosses this border to come and attack positions in Pakistan. So the Pakistani military is basically fencing the border. And if you actually go to YouTube and look at the footage of the fencing apparently is almost 80% done. And this has created huge problems now with people going back and forth across this very, loose, open kind of border that once existed. It's not that easy anymore. And this has then created friction between the Pakistani border guards and the Taliban border guards. And there have been instances of the Taliban soldiers firing on Pakistani soldiers and the Pakistanis firing back. with casualties being reported on both sides. And this is something that is an ongoing problem. This is going on. And closely linked to this problem is the wider problem of Pashtun nationalism and this very strong Afghan irredenta over these Pashtun lands, which are in Pakistan, but which the Afghans believe actually, should be part of Afghanistan. And to compound this problem even more, this border clash that has now emerged due to the fencing and due to the very high animosity now between the border guards, is the other issue, which is that these TTP bases which are now in southern Afghanistan. My information tells me that Pakistani Air Force has carried out actually air attacks on some of these military camps that the TTP are running in southern Afghanistan. And this is creating a major issue between Pakistan and the Taliban government, because the Taliban is saying, you are violating Afghan sovereignty by sending warplanes inside Afghan airspace and dropping bombs on Afghan soil, and that we reserve the right to retaliate. Only problem is they don't have the means to retaliate. But if they had the means to retaliate, does it mean now Afghanistan will come and bomb Pakistan and we'll see the beginning of a war, an air war between the two sides? We don't know. We have to wait and watch. And last but not least in this equation, and this is something that has happened in more recent times, there is now the very strong perception within the Taliban-controlled Afghan government that perhaps too much proximity to Pakistan as a state is not going to help us win international credibility going forward. In fact, what we need to do is we need to create a bit of distance between us and the Pakistani state. We do not need to be seen internationally as a proxy of Pakistan, because we need to get wider international support. We need to get diplomatic recognition. We need to get international aid, etc., etc. And some of you in India probably have followed the news that very secret diplomacy is going on between Afghanistan and India. Recently, there was a very high-level Afghan delegation that had come to New Delhi to talk to Foreign Minister Jaishankar and a few others. The Taliban government is now actually seriously asking India to reopen the Indian embassy and the Indian consulates in Afghanistan, and for India to come back to Afghanistan. Because before the Taliban take over, during this American occupation of Afghanistan, India was one of the largest development partners in Afghanistan. So India was the biggest investor in Afghan development, and India had invested over $1 billion in Afghanistan, as you know. And India was very upset when the Taliban took over that, are we now facing a situation where 20 years effort and money and energy and resources that we have invested in Afghanistan, we need to simply just now walk away from it, and we won't have any leverage. And my take on this is that, look, in politics, especially international politics, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. You have to deal with all kinds of actors. And India had to figure out somehow, to deal with the Taliban. And I think India's message has been very consistent. India has not threatened the Taliban. India has not said anything negative about the Taliban. India, like a very responsible regional superpower, has talked about the need for good governance, the need to create structures so that Taliban can ensure peace in Afghanistan, that development work can go on, and so on and so forth. And I think the Taliban is beginning to understand that India is a far more reliable, responsible player that they need to govern Afghanistan in the future, compared to becoming stooges in the hands of Pakistan, or for that matter, now after Sri Lanka, this very risky approach of dealing with China. But, if you invite China to come and invest millions of dollars in Afghanistan, you are going to end up becoming, a Chinese satellite, completely bankrupt, And the Taliban are not stupid. They're watching what's happening in Sri Lanka. So this overreach to India all of a sudden in the last few months hasn't gone down very well in Islamabad. And this is another line of friction that has emerged. One final thing I would say, and I don't want to go too much into it, I'm already running out of time. One final comment is that in all of this, the other aspect which has been hidden has been the intra-Taliban fighting that has almost started, from the time the Taliban took over in August of 2021. And this is creating friction between Pakistan and the Taliban. And the intra-Taliban fighting basically was because of government formation, right? So you had Mullah Baradar on one side, and Mullah Baradar comes from Kandahar. So he basically represents the southern stronghold of Afghanistan. And the clash was with the Haqqanis, who are very close to the Pakistani ISI. And they are based in the northeast. So their main strength comes from the northeast. So you could see within the Taliban, these two broad groups, the Haqqanis on one side and the Baradars on the other. And there was reports of a serious fighting between Mullah Baradar and one of the Haqqanis. And the rumor was that shots were fired. And ever since that meeting that took place in the presidential palace in Kabul, we actually have not seen Mullah Baradar. So we haven't actually physically seen him. So we can't say with 100% certainty that Mullah Baradar is still actually alive. The rumor is that shots were fired or some fist fight took place. Mullah Baradar was seriously injured, and that he was then taken back to Kandahar probably for treatment, for recuperation, and he's based there, and he's one of the deputy prime ministers of Afghanistan, so one of the deputies, and so is Sirajuddin Haqqani. So they try to balance the power between Baradar and Haqqani by making them deputies. But this is a serious problem, and there's a feeling within the Baradar camp that the Pakistanis are basically having their say with the Haqqanis. They have pitched their tent with the Haqqanis. The Haqqanis are far more hardline. They want to push Afghanistan more towards a hardline position. They don't want India or any other serious player to come back. Whereas the Baradar guys, I'm not saying they're moderates, but they probably were more reasonable. They understood the game a little bit better. They thought that Taliban 2.0, learning lessons from Taliban 1.0, needed to have more of an outreach to the international community. They needed to govern well. They needed to satisfy the West in terms of human rights and a few other things. And there lies a big fault line within the Taliban itself. And it is a question, I don't have the answer. It's a question whether this rupture between the Haqqanis on one side and Mullah Baradar and his people on the other, whether this will end up splitting the Taliban. And if it does split up the Taliban, would that mean Afghanistan again going back to civil war for control? And then obviously the Pakistanis would want to play a major role in backing their protege. So this is where Pakistan-Afghanistan relations are right now. It's not hunky-dory at all. It is quite, stressful at times. There are multiple lines of friction. It's a fluid situation. It's a dynamic situation, and we'll have to wait and watch what happens over the next 6 months to a year in order to fully understand, how this is going to play out. So let me stop there. I've exceeded my time. Happy to take questions and answer your questions as best I can.
Dr. Ganguly, thank you very much for a very comprehensive and very exhaustive coverage of the subject. Pakistan-Afghanistan relations, as you have said, it is conundrum.
Sorry, I can't actually hear you.
I say that you have very comprehensively, very exhaustively expressed your views on the subject. And I can say that you have tried to solve this riddle of relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's a very difficult subject and you have made it very simple for our students, and I think they can understand the various implications of this relationship. Of course, this relationship has implications for India also. So now I will open the house for the students to ask questions. First of all, the students should introduce themselves and then ask questions, and be quick. Dr. Ganguly is a busy person and it's almost midnight, and don't detain him so long. So be
No,
quick.
no, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm absolutely okay. Thank you for that, though.
So yeah, please go on, ask your questions. Come on.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
I would like to thank you for the insightful session. It was very eye-opening. It provided a fresh perspective on what's actually happening in the neighborhood. And I am Pooja Srivatsan, and I am from India. I recently graduated from the field of sociology, and
Okay.
I aspire to become a diplomat, and I'm passionate about foreign policy. So I found this session very useful. So I have a question.
Yep.
So India has no formal diplomatic ties with Taliban government as of now.
Mhm.
So what in your opinion should India's next course of action be, diplomatically speaking? And can India afford to lose its significant ties with Afghanistan given all the developmental work and the infrastructure that it has invested for the past 2 decades, over 2 decades?
Yeah.
So what should India's next course of action be?
Okay. The answer to the second part of the question is that India cannot walk away because we have invested a lot in Afghanistan. And India, if you follow what our government is saying, what Foreign Minister Jaishankar is saying, and a few others are saying, there's a distinction between who's in power, in this case, the Taliban in power, and the Afghan people. So India is saying that we stand with the Afghan people. And the Afghan people need our support. This is a very serious situation in Afghanistan. There are food shortages. There are all kinds of problems in Afghanistan. And you probably know that India was one of the first countries to ship, massive amounts of wheat into Afghanistan. And these were taken by land through Pakistan. And one of the problems that emerged initially was Pakistan was not giving permission for the Indian trucks to cross into Afghanistan through Pakistan over land. So we were thinking of alternative supply routes that we ship the food on ships to Iran, to Chabahar or Bandar Abbas port, and from Iran then by land we take it by trucks into Afghanistan, which is a much longer route and a more precarious route, whereas going through Pakistan through the Khyber Pass is much easier. So we managed to do that. And I think that has gone down extremely well in Afghanistan. That yes, we have serious ideological differences with India, but that didn't stop India from acting as a very responsible senior country. So I think this image of India, that India is a responsible player. We are a serious, responsible country. We will not allow our ideological preferences to derail our support for the Afghan people. I think this has gone quite well. You are absolutely right that no country, no serious country has recognized the Taliban government yet, because everybody's in a wait and watch mode. But that doesn't mean that diplomatic contacts haven't taken place. In fact, we are participating in a lot of discussions with the Taliban office in Doha, in Qatar. These are unofficial conversations that are taking place. And the Doha office in Qatar, basically the Taliban people there represent what I would call, the Kandahar Taliban, the Baradar Taliban. So these people are slightly more was instrumental in starting the discussion with India, was actually not with the Taliban. He was one of the co-presidents of the previous regime, Dr. Abdullah. And the Taliban has even utilized former President Hamid Karzai, who has very good ties with India, to unofficially enter into a discussion with India. So there is an outreach by the Taliban using, unofficial channels to reach India, to convince India to come back. We are not there yet, but my sense is that India eventually will go back. India will want some very, very serious guarantees from the Taliban in terms of, how the country has to be governed. And one thing we have said all along is that we don't want to dictate to them what they should do or not. Our job is to explain to them where we stand, and hopefully then see some changes in the way that they are behaving. And there will be, there will of course be, be rewards for good behavior. So it's a arduous process. We are part of that process now. We haven't reached the final chapter yet, but I think the Pakistanis are a little bit unnerved that the Taliban are now actually reaching out to countries like India saying, we want you back.
Yes, next question.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So I'm Sharbani from India, Kolkata. And my question is with regard to the kind of conferences and kind of discussion that have been going on between China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan that happened in Islamabad, I guess, if I'm not wrong. And India was not included in this discussion during November of 2021. So can we say the captures that you mentioned, like the fault lines that are coming up suddenly with regard to the Durand line and other fault lines that you have mentioned, are these responsible for suddenly bringing India into the picture? Or is India also, while taking this into consideration, considering a very big picture that India has been a non-aligned state from the very beginning, while keeping its distance, it can also very much try to help us take the biggest example would be Sri Lanka, how India has helped Sri Lanka throughout the years without totally going into the system. So would it be all right to say that India has been using the same diplomatic ways that it has used for Sri Lanka, as well as if we say that, is there any way, like if we look at Nepal, how it has a chance, and Nepal and Bangladesh, India has a chance of turning over elections.
I don't want you to look. I mean, I don't want you to draw too much of a comparison between India's approach to Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and India's approach to Afghanistan. I think Afghanistan is qualitatively a very different scenario altogether. I mean, when you are talking about Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, these are actually, democratic countries with democratically elected governments, with sort of liberal constitutions, and so on and so forth. Afghanistan is not. Afghanistan is a very different ballgame. So if comparison, so at the outset, I would caution you from doing that. But the thrust of your question, I think, is fine in the sense that India has limited options vis-a-vis the Taliban. One of the things we can't do is militarily occupy Afghanistan or do something militarily against the Taliban, or arm the resistance movement, providing weapons to them so that they can then topple the Taliban government and all that. We haven't taken that option at all. I mean, that option is off the table. We are not going to go into that. What we have been trying to say, I think, informally to the Taliban is that you have to decide whether you want to be seen internationally as a proxy of the Pakistan state. And if that is what you want, because ideologically you are with them, you want to be known as the proxy of the Pakistan state, then it will come with significant cost. And the cost will be nobody will recognize you, you won't get any international acceptance, you will be diplomatically, completely treated like a pariah, there will be no massive aid given to you, etc., etc. Now, if you're happy with that, then that's okay, you will be Pakistan's proxy, but then you got to ask yourself, what can your master, Pakistan, deliver for you? Well, how can your own master, who Pakistan itself is an economically bankrupt state, how can it support you in the kind of things that you need to do? And it is here, I think, the message is going in, the Taliban realizes that when it was an insurgent organization based in Pakistan fighting American forces, that was one totally different scenario compared to now when it is actually in power and it has to govern and it has to deliver, and it is really struggling with that. And it needs international support, it needs international cooperation, it needs the big players to come back, it needs massive investments to come back. It is on these questions that the practical side of governing, I think, is beginning to hit home with the Taliban. And there are people within the Taliban who are basically saying, we need to tone down our extreme image so that we can deal with these people, these countries who are serious countries like India or the United States or Europe. To what extent they will be successful in doing that is in my judgment the key to whether you will see India back or not. So my sense is that India is in the position now of actually having a informal discussion, nothing official, no guarantee of recognition, nothing of that sort, not promising we are going to come back, we are going to bring another $1 billion, we'll give you the money, nothing of that sort, but basically saying we want to see some seriousness on your part, that you are serious about running the country, and detaching yourself from these people in Pakistan who have basically used you and will continue to use you. And I think that's beginning to now resonate in Afghanistan, which is why the Pakistanis are very upset that the people that they had supported previously are now all of a sudden raking up all these issues against them. And reaching out to what Pakistan considers its main enemy, which is India. Pakistan wouldn't mind at all if the Taliban were to reach out to China. But I think after what has happened in Sri Lanka, the Taliban probably would have to be incredibly stupid, to hitch their wagon to the Chinese horse. And the Chinese won't invest any money in Afghanistan unless they are guaranteed of a probably don't think that they can guarantee. So technically what I'm saying is that even if the Chinese invest and Afghanistan becomes a satellite state of China, what is China's payoff from that? How would China really benefit from that? Is something that Beijing is going to always consider before it invests money. And therein lies the Taliban's dilemma. And India probably now in a position where we can explain to them how international politics has to be played. So I think what will happen between now and end of the year into next year would be crucial time frame when a lot of discussions will happen, through the back channel way.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yes. Next question.
Hello, sir. My name is Anshika, and thank you so much for all the insights that you've given. So I had a question regarding the strategic mistakes that Pakistan has made, and the insights that you also provided about TTP and like how there's been a lot of instability within Pakistan. Considering that, and also how India could have a leverage in this situation, in this conflict, but Pakistan still has some sort of say leverage in terms of the border supply or say the trade routes that is with respect to Afghanistan. So do you think that India should take some strategic measures to counter that, or it should take the neutral stance that you've been mentioning in previous questions? So what could be the
well, if you look at the last 10 years, how we have been cultivating Iran and how we have been building up the Chabahar port, Bandar Abbas port, another one in Iran. So from India's point of view, I think, developing these ports in Iran and then developing the land connection through Iran into Afghanistan and into Central Asia is essentially a way of bypassing Pakistan. That, we also realize that if we could